back with more of the Shacknews Awards 2023. We're going to get a little old school here. Giving out an award for Best Old School Throwback. This is a game that came out this year that harkens back to the old days. Like the GameCube, right, Donovan? Isn't that old school now?
It is retro. Has been for a couple of years, actually.
I hate you. Anyway, here are the nominees. RoboCop Rogue City, F-Zero 99, Cassette Beasts, Double Dragon Gaiden, Rise of the Dragons, Pizza Tower, and Bomb Rush Cyberpunk. What a list that is. And let's get into it.
Stacked.
RoboCop Rogue City. Craig,
Yes.
let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, like, RoboCop made a video game in 2023 that had all the likeness rights, the music, the sound effects, the locations, nearly 1-to-1. And it's a worthy nomination because the last good RoboCop game I played was in the arcades. That's how old I am. And it was a 2D side-scrolling game. And then they've made a few for the NES. They've not been great. They made a RoboCop versus Terminator game for the Sega Genesis, which was terrible. So, like, Alex Murphy's been absent in the video game space, and he came back, and boy, did this studio understand scope and what works and what didn't work. It was just such an impressive game across the board to a 1980s franchise that has been long forgotten. They had a TV show. It was hot for a minute. They had TV shows. They made 3 movies, 3 feature-length movies, and a television show. No one remembers the television show. It was good. But, yeah.
They also rebooted the films.
We don't talk about that. We don't talk about that one. They don't talk
it didn't go so well. That didn't go so well. But RoboCop is definitely an old school IP.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people are being introduced to it with this game. And they're not being introduced to some, made up reboot. This is a game that takes place kind of in between RoboCop 2 and 3. So that universe has already been built for them, and they get to kind of exist inside of that universe. You mentioned something else. Like the character models in this game are excellent. They also got Peter Weller's voice for RoboCop, which I think is a huge deal, and his likeness. So the game's RoboCop really does look like the RoboCop that people who remember those movies identify the character with. I think that's great. The use of music is excellent. And embracing the fact that RoboCop does kind of move like a tank.
He does.
And he clomps around. He barely can run. And he can just take bullets. I think a lot of games when they try to make, like a Superman game or like a superhero game, they err on the side of making the character squishier than they really are. Spider-Man this year is a good example of that. Like Spider-Man dies. Boy, if I'm playing as Spider-Man, does Spider-Man die a lot? It's hard to die in RoboCop Rogue City. Like it is. You're able to regen your health. It's kind of like Halo in that sense where you can you go hide in a corner and you hit a button and your health regens. Obviously Halo is like auto regen. But building it into the concept of RoboCop's armor, I think is a good way to handle that. So there is like a fail condition in this game, but you are a badass robot that can take bullets more than most people. So I do think it's worth noting. You mentioned the soundtrack, mentioned the other characters present in the game, but also the locations, right, Greg? Like the police station looks very much like the police station in the films. The area where RoboCop is kind of the maintenance happens on him and where he rests in the police station looks exactly like where he would be in the films. So I love that aspect of it where they had a reverence for the IP. And I think a good old school throwback has to do that. It's not a requirement for this category though. You don't have to just make a game based on a retro IP. You can make a brand new game in this category that harkens back to the past. I think some of our other nominees did that this year.
Yeah, and to give him some perspective to Donovan, I was not allowed to watch the RoboCop movies for quite a long time, even though I wanted to. My parents were like, "Nah." And eventually, I got to, but yeah, I didn't get
My
to see them.
my brother snuck me into RoboCop 2, and I had nightmares for
That's
a
a
while.
entirely violent movie. It's
Like,
very
I was
violent.
Greg, I was the opposite. I was allowed to watch
Yeah.
RoboCop. I just didn't.
I know. You can watch whatever I wanted. I would have envied so much when I was like a young Greg would be like, "Damn it, Donovan gets to watch everything. I didn't get to watch anything."
Yeah, I had older brothers, so I was lucky enough where they would,
Mhm.
sneak me into stuff from time to time or buy the tickets so that,
I don't think I could handle the claymation alternate RoboCop testing part as a child. That
RoboCop
was
2 is
a
terrifying.
really,
what he does with that brain.
yeah.
I was like, did he just rip a brain out of that robot? But yeah, no spoilers from a movie from God knows how long ago. I don't think Donovan was even a zygote when RoboCop 2 came out. But yeah. Anything else? Any other flowers we want to give RoboCop Rogue City?
Just
It's
great
very
because
fun.
small little studio overseas, got a chance to do something great, and they did, which was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely crushed it. So congratulations to Taeyon on that. I think just a really good balance of making something that feels new. Right, this is Unreal Engine 5 game, while at the same time like really
Understanding their
staying
budget.
true. Yeah,
Understanding
but
their
also like
budget, what they
staying
could do.
true, staying true to the IP, or the spirit of the IP. Because it is a challenge making a game where you play as a cop.
Yeah, not great. Yeah, not a
That
great
could go
subject
bad.
matter to focus on. Yeah.
That could go poorly. But RoboCop has always been a good critique of modern police forces, and I think that this game is that. It does that well.
Yeah.
But yeah, and you can like write parking tickets in it. It's just such a ridiculous game. Love it.
And handle noise complaints.
Yeah, like the mundane cop stuff that he gets to do is like some of my favorite stuff in the game. But yeah, and also great headshots. You can shoot people in the junk just like he did in the movie. It's great. I think I'll talk about this next nominee.
I hope so.
So, a long time ago, SNES launched with a racing game to show off Mode 7 technology. We had never seen it before. And that game was F-Zero. This was one of the hardest racing games, I think, of its time. Critically acclaimed, birthed countless songs that have been remixed and remade, introduced 4 new characters and 4 new vehicles that had become the icons of the franchise. And in this year, on the September 14th Nintendo Direct, Nintendo announced a new F-Zero game. And they did it in a way where they showed you the starting line of the SNES game, and then they zoomed out, and suddenly you realized this is a brand new 16:9 aspect ratio game built in the F-Zero universe. So they've taken the art style of the SNES game, but they brought gameplay mechanics from the N64 game, and then they threw in this brand new concept for Nintendo of making a 99 player racing game. This could not have worked as a Mario Kart game. It would have been awful. Can you imagine 98 bullet bills going at the same time on a racetrack? Can you imagine 80 blue shells being shot at the same time?
No, it requires a complete redesign. You can't. It doesn't work at all. It does not.
You couldn't do it. But F-Zero worked perfectly in this environment because it's a racing game. It's not a party game. It doesn't have the rubber banding of a Mario Kart game. So it worked perfectly. They took the boost mechanic from F-Zero X. They took the spinning mechanic from F-Zero X. They took the rival system from F-Zero X, the art style from F-Zero, and they built a brand new game. Like, this is a new F-Zero game. F-Zero 99 is not a remake. It's not a remaster. It's a reimagining of what they could do with this old school IP. And we've seen Nintendo hit some home runs with this 99 formula, right? Tetris 99 is still one of the most popular games on Switch online. Pac-Man 99 was a success. It recently got delisted. And probably my favorite up until this point was Mario 35, which took that formula and applied it to 35 players. And Steve was Mario number 1.
Steve is very good at that game.
Yeah,
Watched him
it was
stream
a
it.
hell
He's
of a
very
game.
good.
Yeah, we both of us love that game. But yeah, Nintendo has shown in the past this is a way to reboot or kind of bring some IP back in a completely different way. I don't think we get this game if the Switch isn't this successful. And I don't think we get this game if the N64 app didn't have some traction from when they released F-Zero X. So I think that Nintendo has been kind of slowly stepping towards making a new F-Zero game. This is definitely a new F-Zero game, but when I say that, I mean a new single-player focused one, where you can play it offline. So I still think that they're testing the waters for the F-Zero franchise here. But yeah, the release of this game, it's definitely an old school throwback. The music is all like 16-bit songs. There's like the menu design in this game is just frequent hat tips to like the art that you would see in the instruction booklet. Remember instruction booklets, kids?
I remember.
So there's like Mr. Zero is all over the place. He's like the voice of the tip screen. Featured in the menus. It's just awesome. If you're an F-Zero fan, you're going to see a ton of little things in this game that are just little winks and nods to you. So yeah, for a long-suffering fan base like F-Zero 90, or like F-Zero in general, F-Zero 99 is this ridiculous, surprising delight. And it is most definitely an old-school throwback, because the game is hard as hell. It pulls no punches. And F-Zero was also hard as hell. If 12-year-old Asif beat F-Zero on master difficulty, 42-year-old Asif, it's a little more difficult. And yeah, F-Zero 99 is hard as hell. I know Greg won. He doesn't even remember how he did it, but he did win. I'm over 600 races in, haven't won, having the time of my life. But yeah, F-Zero 99 is one hell of an old school throwback, and just has obviously been featured in a lot of other categories at the Shacknews Awards. But yeah, definitely an old school throwback. I don't know if anyone has anything else they want to chime in F-Zero 99, but I made my case. Donovan,
Yes.
yeah, tell the folks about Cassette Piece and why it's being nominated in this category.
Yes, I love Cassette Beast, and it's a different kind of old school throwback in that it's not based on like an old IP. It's not a revival of a franchise. It's more so spiritually inspired by a franchise, that franchise being Pokemon, because Cassette Beast is a monster collector and battler, in which you find a bunch of different creatures in the wild. You catch them, train them, they learn moves, very Pokemon-esque. But I think that Cassette Beast does a number of things to separate it from Pokemon. I'm usually not a fan of Pokemon clones. I think so many of them are like bottom of the barrel. We're just trying to do Pokemon, but with other characters. But Cassette Beast brings a lot of fun, new things to the playing field, like the way that they handle typings, right? Like they've got fire and water and stuff, but they also have like plastic is one of the types. Like it's a traffic cone. It's like a crab and it's a traffic cone. It's one of, like the early Cassette Beasts you find, and they do this thing where like instead of, if you use an effective move, instead of just doing like double damage, it'll weaken it. So if you use like a fire type move on a plastic type Pokemon, beast, Cassette Beast as they're called, it'll it'll like weaken that creature's attacks. So it's more like a debuff than just a damage multiplier. And the game has this like musical theme, obviously in the title. You keep this cassette, like what is it, a tape deck? Was that what you called those things, whatever they are?
Oh my god.
Oh,
Yes.
dear lord.
and then-
Walkman? Was it a Walkman?
Walkman.
I think that was like
Yeah.
the brand that made, but they don't
Yeah.
call them that, but it's essentially that.
No, a tape
yeah,
deck. Nah, just real quick.
Oh,
A tape
right.
deck
it's a Walkman.
was like a device that you would plug into a wall.
Yeah.
A Walkman was a
Ah.
portable tape deck.
Yeah, it's a Walkman.
Yes.
So
Okay.
it's a
You
Walkman.
have a
Yeah, it's a Walkman.
Walkman to keep, and all of the creatures, instead of being in like Pokeballs, they're in like the tapes. So you'll have a tape and they'll have a sticker on it that tells you which creature it is, and you like drop it into the deck and you hit play, and that's how you send them out into the field. And your character actually can transform into the different ones. So like whenever you play one, you turn into that creature. It's how you do turn into them. Very Digimon-esque, I guess, in that sense. But also any two creatures, and there's like I think over 100 original cassette beasts can fuse. It's like an ultimate power up when you do like a double battle, and the game has unique design combination and names for every single possible permutation of like
Wow.
beasts in the game. Which yeah, when I was playing, I was like, "There's no way." I was like, I assumed there'd be like 12 like preset ones you could do. And then I found the like wiki and I was scrolling down. There's like, no, it's like every single one pairs. And I mean, some of them are like just a color swap or like one will just have the head. But a lot of them are really cool. And I'm like, that's a lot of work for an indie studio. I believe it's a Byton Studio was a 2-person dev team, if I'm remembering correctly. But that's a lot of like heavy lifting for an indie team to do.
That's
And
10,000 possible combinations.
yeah, there's a shit ton that you can do there. I think the story is actually kind of dark. Like they get into some like weird themes where you're like talking to like evil demons and whatnot. I think the boss battles are pretty tough. It's a actual fun, creative, unique spin on that Pokemon formula, and they use 2D sprites. It's all sprites. They're not doing any weird looking 3D models. The sprites look gorgeous. I enjoy it quite a bit.
And it shows you can make a game in that 2D Pokemon formula and it'll still hit. It might be an interesting lesson for the Pokemon company.
Yeah. Yep.
Nice.
Yep.
Definitely a good old school throwback and kind of highlights what we're talking about with this category. It doesn't have to be a reimagining of an existing IP. You can build something brand new that is influenced by something old school and see some success there. And you know, we talked about in other categories or even off when we weren't recording. But yeah, it would be neat to see the Pokemon Company maybe go back to this formula because it wasn't necessarily broken.
Yep.
Yeah, good nomination. Next up, Double Dragon Gaiden: Rise of the Dragons. Can't really think of anything more old school than the Double Dragon IP. Pretty old school there.
This one's like a decent celebration of Double Dragon history as well. Like you have Billy and Jimmy Lee. You have Marion, who has taken on, pardon, who has taken on a role as like now she's a cop in that city. And then there's like all the returning characters like a Bobo, Linda, uh, and just like the. I think one of my favorite things about this game is the attention to detail when it came to not just the level design but also the music. They really did a good job of remixing like concepts from throughout Double Dragon history and the music throughout it. They brought back one of my favorite themes in the entire series, which is the level 1 casino theme from Super Double Dragon. I love that song. I think it's one of the best beat 'em up songs of all time. But also just like they took such an interesting approach to this one because it's a roguelike game. You take there are 4 main crime bosses throughout the city that you have to take on, and you choose which one you go for. And as you defeat each one, the remaining crime bosses get stronger and have more levels that you have to go through, more like sub bosses that you have to go through, and are generally just more challenging. And on your end, as you go through this game and lose, you collect tokens which can be used to unlock more characters, unlock more modifiers, and like you can make this game just about as easy or as hard as you want straight up in the options where like you can turn on unlimited continues, you can adjust the damage that enemies do, adjust the damage that you do. it's not easy, but it is very adjustable to a point where like you can just play it for fun if you want to.
That's awesome. Yeah, a very worthy nominee, and kind of the other side of things, right? This is an old school IP that is kind of being revived with this game, and like you said, there's a sense of reverence for the past with like how they handle the soundtrack and stuff like that. So yeah, very good nomination. We can keep the train rolling though. Pizza Tower up next. Actually, these next two nominees are that other side, kind of like Cassette Beasts, right? Where Pizza Tower takes inspiration from a lot of platformers and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of fast games, right? I guess you could say there's some Sonic influence there. But there's also this like I know it's not a Metroidvania, but you know the backtracking in Pizza Tower, it does remind me of certain parts of my favorite Metroid games. So
Yeah.
there's like this little bit of influence from the Metroid games, I think, in Pizza Tower with that core mechanic of like you go as deep as you can into the level, you do the thing, and then you have to get out.
Yep.
The speed in the game is really what strikes me, and what stuck with me is it's a fast, fun game, and it's got some really cool gameplay mechanics that, like, once you learn all of them, it's just watching someone play this game at a high level is really entertaining. And I hope that we start to see speed runs of this down the road. But yeah, it's Pizza Tower is very unique, very different, and it's
It's
like,
got
go ahead.
one of the funniest power-ups I've ever seen in a game is when you get the suit of armor. It is so clunky and you can do very little with it until you hit a slope. And then you just start sliding in the armor uncontrollably. And you have your little sword out in front of you, so everything in front of you just gets stabbed. But you have to like jump just enough as you're sliding through the level to like get to certain breakable objects that you can only break in the suit of armor. It's so ridiculous and silly.
Hmm. And the
And
character model is ridiculous and silly. The eyes, just the expressive face, like the just the wobbly nature of the character in general. It's just
mhm,
funny as hell, and like not the gameplay wise, just art style wise, it reminds me of like the Earthworm Jim games in some way.
yeah,
uh, which I loved those games too. So it's just from an art style perspective, from a gameplay perspective, it's old school as hell. Even though this is a brand new IP and a brand new game, which is yeah another great nominee. Our last one is Bomb Rush Cyberpunk. This is kind of similar, right? We're although this is like a little bit more on the nose. What was that game? You Will Die Here Tonight, right?
Mhm.
Is that or You Will Die Tonight?
Yep.
That's kind of like this, right? Where that game is like very much so a nod to Resident Evil, and horror games kind of built on that framework. Bomb Rush Cyberpunk is literally a love letter to Jet Grind, Jet Set Radio, and they've taken it to a different level than we had seen with Jet Set Radio. So much so that Sega paid Jeff Keighley to run a commercial during the Game Awards that featured 5 game announcements in one of which was a Jet Set Radio remake. So one has to think that Sega was paying attention to Bomb Rush Cyberpunk this year, and they're like, hey, there might be some demand for this kind of game. If you hadn't played the Jet Grind or Jet Set Radio games, it was about a futuristic group of graffiti artists who were grinding all over the place and tagging stuff, back in the Dreamcast era. And God, is Dreamcast now old school, Donovan?
Oh, been old school for years, many years.
How many years?
Dreamcast was old school before I started writing for Shacknews, I would wager.
God, I hate you.
Too many years.
But yeah, anyway, it's old school because passage of time has happened, and that idea, I gotta say, it still feels fresh. Like the gameplay still feels really good. I enjoy. I love graffiti art in general. The street nature of it and uh, the art behind it. So yeah, this game is unique, fun. It's got an amazing soundtrack. I will say the soundtrack doesn't sound old school. It sounds like it's from the future. But the game is kind of from the future. Yeah, love it. Jet Grind Radio was great. Jet Set Radio, Jet Set Future, all those games were fun. And this is like a continuation of that in a brand new IP. Very small team made this game, and it turned out great. Very worthy nomination here. This is going to be a tough one. We got some excellent games in this category, and this, we've said it before, what a tremendous year for releases of video games. So let's get to voting. What do you say? Sound like a plan? I'm going to start with Donovan.
Ooh. I will stick with Cassette Piece.
Okay.
I think he made me happy.
I'm going to vote for F-Zero 99, to no one's surprise. Greg.
I mean, there's a lot of cool games on here. Double Dragon's one. There's a good case for that. But I think what the power lays is having people go back to experience something they haven't before. And I think F-Zero did that better than any of the games on that list. People are experiencing F-Zero GX for the first time, F-Zero on the Super Nintendo for the first time, F-Zero on the... Which one was in the GameCube? I get the GameCube and the arcade one.
GX was the GameCube
GX
one.
and DX, right? Like they're
No,
searching.
AX.
They're finding those.
AX.
So I'm gonna do F-Zero.
AX was the arcade cabinet version
AX.
of F-Zero GX.
There's so many X's now. I can't. There's too many X's.
F-Zero X was the N64 entry. So the last console entry for the F-Zero franchise was F-Zero GX for Nintendo GameCube.
There you go.
Which, by Donovan's definition, is an old school game now. Which means that an SNES game is ancient.
It's still retro if it's over, what, 20 years? I don't know.
I guess so.
All right.
But yeah, a solid vote. TJ.
Greg stole the words right out of my mouth. F-Zero 99 for all those reasons.
Nice. Steve. Host of the
Oh my
Steve
gosh.
Tendo Show.
Yeah, this is hard. This is another tough one. Because Pizza Tower feels just like a spiritual successor to Wario Land. Wario Land 4 and Wario Land Shake It Dimension pretty much do almost everything that Pizza Tower tries to do in going through and going back. But I got to give it to F-Zero 99. I mean, that just feels like it could have been made then, it could have been made now, and it was made now.
Yeah, and it's a balance of old school visuals but with brand new tech. So like, you know that first scene in an F-Zero 99 race where it shows you that wide swath of racers all on the same starting line? That's that moment where you're like, this is a new game. But then once you jump and you're in the track, you're back in the 16-bit era. I think they added classic mode just to show people, here's the difference. Like, it's drastically different. But it is it tips its cap to the retro era in a really big way. So let me get some of these absentee ballots in. It looks like Bill. Sorry, I'm lost. Old school throwback. Here we go. Bill voted for RoboCop.
Nice.
And David voted for F-Zero 99. And Denny voted for Bomb Rush Cyberpunk. Don, I'm going to have you down. Ozzy, my man, voted for F-Zero 99. And who else? Are we missing anyone else? Sam voted for F-Zero 99. Wow. Stacked category, as we mentioned at the beginning of this discussion. All these games are awesome. Highly recommend everyone check out all of them. They're different games, different genres. but all do that same thing where they harken back to a different era, either in film or in games. In the case of RoboCop, definitely more of a throwback to the films. F-Zero 99, we've talked about it ad nauseum during these awards. Cassette Beast, I think, Donovan, you made a great case for why it deserves to be here, and also why it might be more fun than playing modern day Pokemon games, which I think is kind of neat. Double Dragon, Gaiden, Rise of the Dragons. Double Dragon is a classic IP, so I'm happy to hear that they tried something different, TJ, this year. Steve, you hit Pizza Tower perfectly there, and yeah, we've sung the praises of Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, but there can only be one best old school throwback game of the year 2023, and against all odds, it's F-Zero 99. Congratulations, Nintendo. We did it.